Welcome to Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet, your host. Your other host is in studio, Captain Ron. We're excited to have our guest today. We have Professor Michael Dennin, who has been a professor of physics and astronomy at University of California. He's appeared on numerous television programs, including Science of Superman, Batman Tech, Star Wars, and Ancient Aliens, one of our favorite shows. We're going to touch on a couple topics that we hope you guys enjoy. We're going to talk about some theories that he has about how space travel will be possible and how current technology has impacted our ability to detect extrasolar planets and the growing understanding of our universe. And I'm going to ask the question, are superheroes of today inspired by ancient aliens of the past? So stick with us right here on Truth Be Told. So please welcome Professor Michael Dennin.
Hello.
Hey, Michael, welcome to the show. You didn't know we had a
thank you. I didn't know I was going to get such a applause.
That's Captain Ron clapping all of his hands. So,
Right.
But thank you so much for joining us. This is a great honor to have you on the show. We are excited because there is a big event that happened today, and I'm going to let Captain Ron take it.
It's the perfect day to have you on the show. What an ideal coincidence. As we all know, there was an asteroid that just passed right next to the Earth this afternoon. And I thought maybe you could kind of speak to us about that and how dangerous it is and how lucky we are and how rare this is or whatever.
So, I mean, I think it's one of those standard things. First of all, it makes great movies always that we're going to get hit by an asteroid and destroyed. And people are really worried about it. And, it is something that will probably eventually happen. I mean, it's happened in the past. We have good records of fairly large craters. Growing evidence that really did contribute to the dinosaur extinction, a massive event. And if an asteroid hits, it's going to make a ton of dust, make darkness, cold, winter, all of those things. But it amazes me. From a space point of view, we actually are a pretty small target.
True.
And you also have the moon is able to play this role of protecting the Earth. And it's one of those fascinating things when you look at what we do know about the planets, even just in our solar system, and now as we start to learn more about other planets, the role that moon plays. Our moon is relatively big for a moon, and its orbit does move around in different ways. It has an additional gravity, it has a shielding effect, and it does help protect us, particularly in early stages when there were a lot more asteroids. The solar system's a little calmer now, they're not quite as often, and so that's been a critical part for life to kind of evolve and for us to be here and be safe.
That's why the aliens put it right there.
I was going to say
that's exactly why the aliens put it right there.
I was going to say, people say it was placed there, so now it makes sense. So, Michael.
And it lines up exactly for the eclipse, too. So.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
Now, did you guys get to see the eclipse?
I did.
Oh, yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough when I was walking in, they was giving out glasses. It was pretty,
Okay.
It's a pretty amazing, feat. And I'm curious on what is the significance of that for us? I mean, other than just going, oh, that's cool, and it darkens and for the day, what is the significance for Earth itself?
I think it's exactly what you said. It's cool and it gets dark for a little bit. It was one of those things I was asked to give talks on the eclipse at different places. And it was one of the hardest talks I've had to give in my life because you're invited to talk for 50 minutes and you sit down and you go to write it and you say, the moon blocks the sun.
Right, it's self-explanatory.
And now I have 59 more minutes.
I swear to God, right before you came on the air, I made that joke to Tony that I said I'm going to ask him, what happens when an eclipse occurs? Because everybody gets so excited about it, and even people that did ask me when we were watching, They were asking me questions. I'm like, it is what it is. I mean, there's not a lot to say here.
But it does do two things. I think one of the exciting, as a scientist, one of the exciting things about the eclipse is how well we can predict it, right? And it's one of those things. I mean, we knew to the minute and to the location if you wanted to go watch the eclipse where you needed to be standing.
And it'll tell you what percentage of the sun will be blocked.
And what percentage will be blocked.
It's amazing.
And we're even, we've got the next N eclipses predicted. And so you can plan your life out around eclipses. And so people are able,
I do.
There are people who make every total eclipse. And a lot of times that means getting on a ship and being in the middle of the ocean because that's the only place where it's total. And it just shows the predictive power of science. So that's kind of a cool piece from a science point of view. And from a history point of view, if you're into history, it's kind of neat to see how people have reacted to eclipses over the years, and which civilizations paid attention, tracked them, and then they were able to predict them even without computers and telescopes and the technology we have now.
Now that's amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And so when there's a full moon, or and it does affect the tides, when there is a solar or a solar eclipse, does it affect the tides at that time also? Because
and it turns out, just because whenever you have either a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, everything's more lined up. You actually get greater tides than when they're not lined up, because the sun and the moon are acting together in that case.
So it does affect us,
Yeah.
Okay, that makes
Hey,
sense.
can we go back to the asteroid for a second again?
Sure.
I had somebody ask me this morning about this. I wonder why we couldn't put something on this asteroid. It's coming so close. You think we'd have the technology to put something on there that could follow it going out into space, like a webcam or whatever, just sort of something that would, a camera or collect data. And without having to set up a probe, we could just jump onto this thing and follow it wherever it goes.
I think that's kind of one of my hopes for the private space industry. Right. Because it is expensive, right, to get there. But you're exactly right. Sort of the technology is getting there. We've got plenty of ability. The space is a harsh atmosphere for life, but we've solved most of the problems that make technology work, right? Our telescopes are out above the atmosphere. We've sent lots of probes into space. And so conceptually, I think you have a great idea. It's the cost of getting a probe from Earth out of, into orbit and to land on the asteroid. And the government can only do so much. NASA's program is only so well funded. But if people like SpaceX can really figure out how to commercialize space, then you're going to see a lot more of that. And I feel like we're a little bit at that stage. We haven't quite figured out what the equivalent of gold is yet, right? The Europeans didn't really start going to the Americas until someone came back with gold from South America.
True.
Columbus went. I hate to make fun of Columbus. Columbus kind of went because he had the size of the Earth wrong and thought he could make it to India.
Right.
Everybody else knew the Earth was much bigger and were like, "You're crazy. You're never going to make it." And luckily, America was here and got in his way. And luckily, America had gold, and then people started exploring. Space is kind of in that same thing. We once someone figures out how to make money off of it, I think we're going to see a lot more exploration.
This is what you and I talked about before the show, Tony. We were saying that they're going to mine asteroids and meteor things that come by, right? They're going to go up there.
There's a lot of stuff on asteroids that we can use here on Earth.
Is that close, you think?
You've just got is it close? As soon as private people start getting involved, I think it's closer. And that's what's happened. So, I'd hesitate to predict, but I do think we're getting down to where it's 10, 20, 25 years out. Wow. Where we can reach that tipping point where mining something like that becomes efficient enough. The other direction it might go is people finally really say, let's colonize the moon or Mars, right? And once you want to get a colony up there, mining out in space becomes more important.
Okay, this may be just a generic question, and a lot of people are like, we know this, but what's the difference between a meteor and an asteroid?
There are no dumb questions, Tony.
No, just dumb people.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody has their own technical definition, but in general, once it's entered the Earth's atmosphere, it's become a meteor.
Oh, okay.
So an asteroid and a meteor are basically the same thing. It's just where they're going. So if they're not coming in and hitting the Earth or hitting another object, like the moon or another planet, we would call it an asteroid still. And once it's going in and going to impact us, it gets its name changed to Meteor.
In that case, though, we get hit all the time. Like I'm showing a picture of the one that went over Russia. So the one over Russia must have been a fairly decent size. So why didn't we even see that? You would think as much as we're watching the skies that we see something of that size heading our way. And they would say, hey, just, so you know.
I think once they get there's that unfortunate dangerous zone of so small it's really hard to see unless you happen to be looking right at it,
right?
But still big enough to look and be somewhat dangerous, right? So there's kind of that. The nice thing is the things that are that small that they're a little dangerous are not that dangerous. So it's not great to have it come in and hit, but you're not that worried, even if you're going to miss it.
Right.
You kind of have to get lucky to see it.
Okay, Tony, question for you is, what's the difference between a hurricane and a typhoon?
Ooh.
Typhoid?
like
No,
that
typhoid or typhoon?
Typhoon.
Oh, okay. Different location, isn't it?
That's it. They're the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It's just like we say that in the West, and
Yeah.
they call it then. Right.
It's like a cyclone and a tornado.
Enough of our comedy. Let's go back to this.
Thanks,
This asteroid's got us to thinking about these things, and I thought we'd ask you a little bit about this. In 1977, we sent up the Voyager 1 and the Voyager 2, and they were supposed to last, I think, 4 years, and it was going to collect all this data.
Right.
And I've recently learned how they're still working at full capacity, and we're 40 years going. Is that amazing? Is that true?
Yeah, and it is amazing until I'll just tell a little story. I have a microwave that I was given in 1988 that still works.
Okay.
And any microwave that was built after that I bought has died. So I think, it's a testament to how well we can build stuff. And those things, a lot of care went into those. And yes, engineers are very cautious. And so they tend to over design a little as appropriate. And these have done incredibly well. One of the things that helps is they haven't really been hit by a major asteroid, as we've been discussing, and that's hard to predict.
Right.
Whether they'll
40 years of being out there, and they're traveling at like something like 10 miles an hour, 10 miles a second, something like that, right?
Yeah,
it's crazy
I forget
fast.
the exact speed, but that shows the other cool thing about space. Sitting here on Earth, the physics we teach our students is, right, things remain in motion or remain at rest unless a force acts on them. But we're sitting in a world where friction is around us all the time, whatever it is, with the ground, with the air. And it's hard to have that intuitive feel that once you're out in space and you're moving, you just keep moving, right? You don't need fuel. You don't need propulsion. Right. You just go, and there's nothing to stop you. And so this is kind of a reminder of that it really does work.
Okay, now that's a good point. Now, okay, so what you just said, now that would make us think that we could get to the next planet.
Yeah.
Because once we just need the fuel to get up there, because once we're going, you're saying we could just keep on going.
Oh, exactly.
So what is the limitation then for us to get to the next star system?
I think the biggest limitation to get to the next star system is how we want to do it. So the easiest way to get anywhere far is to get your ship up fairly fast. Most people have heard of this by now, that special relativity tells you if you go fast enough, time slows for you. So you would actually be living at a slower rate, and you would still be alive when your ship got to the next star system. Now, there are some challenges of getting up to the speed of light. It takes a lot of fuel, but it's fundamentally an engineering problem. And once something becomes an engineering problem, it's solvable. The other decision you could make, of course, is we say, look, we're going to make a big enough ship. We're not going to worry about the people who start out getting there. We're just going to put enough people in it and have enough life support that, they basically live their lives in the ship, and whatever generation is alive when they get there gets there. So that's another way to do it. The thing I think we're learning from an engineering point of view is the bigger challenge is we've had people up in the space station for a long time, as we've had people in zero gravity, is the biological effects are stronger than I think we first expected. And so biology, I wouldn't call it a limitation, but it's probably the biggest challenge, right? How do you keep people from having their muscles degenerate? How do you create fake gravity? We know there's ways to do it by spinning things and getting centrifugal acceleration, but those are the engineering problems we're really working on for that long distance, what I would call straightforward space explanation.
So if you're saying it's just an engineering problem, then at least theoretically, if there were extraterrestrial life forms on another star system or another planet or whatever, they could travel here if they've overcome those engineering challenges.
Yes. So this gets into so people often ask me, because I assume life exists elsewhere in the universe, and I have my non-scientific reason and my scientific reason. The non-scientific reason, if there wasn't life elsewhere, that's a big waste of space.
Right.
Very good.
Why
Sounds
would
like
it
my
be
brain.
Yeah. But I do think life's elsewhere. But I also don't think life has visited here yet. And people say, okay, why? What's your reasoning behind these two things? And it comes down to the following question is what would lead to, and what are the conditions, and what's the probability of getting life elsewhere? And I would argue that it's one, and you know that because we have life on Earth. And here's sort of the weird reasoning. I'm going to take a short digression into heating pans of oil on your stove. So if
That's okay, do that, because Tony's going to give us some cooking tips next, so that's fine.
So
Just
we
go
can do
ahead.
cooking. So if you have a pan of oil sitting on your stove, the molecules are all moving randomly, and you would never expect the oil to make nice, consistent little convection rolls, where the oil goes up and down in organized ways and makes a nice pattern. Now, if you heat that oil from below, there's a temperature difference and a wide range where that's exactly what happens with probability 1. So the molecules are still moving randomly, but you've radically changed the probabilities because the physics has radically changed, because now you have a system that you're heating versus a system that you're not heating. Now, why would I care about this example? It's because that's what the Earth is. It's an object sitting in space that the sun is heating up. And we don't know what the details of the condition are. With oil, I can tell you the detailed physics. With the Earth, it's too complicated at the moment. But I know there's physics that tells me in this range of parameters, I get life and I get intelligent life. And I also get to know roughly how long it takes. So going back to the oil example, there's a time it takes once you start heating it to get the rolls. So with that logic, I can sort of say, I know the general conditions in the universe, we've been looking at stars long enough, are roughly the same. So there are probably plenty of spots out in space that have roughly the same conditions we have. And that means with probability 1, there's life there. But it also means that life is roughly at the same technological level we are. And given the time it takes to get between planets, even if they're ahead by a few thousand years, they wouldn't be here yet. So I really feel the situation we're in is there's a whole bunch of life out there. We're all a few thousand years around each other. Somebody will get the technology first, and that will determine whether they visit us first or we visit them first.
Well, based on the age of all of this, obviously there's a lot of places that are ahead of us. They've had more time to develop. And then the other idea, the thought is that obviously some people used to think that we were alone in the universe, but if we find one more, then that means there's a million, because if there's two, there's going to be reasoning there'd be a large number, right? So wasn't there the Drake equation that kind of figured out, like he guessed?
The Drake equation is a nice idea, but it's missing a key piece of what my oil analogy tells you.
Tell our audience what the Drake equation is so that they know what we're talking about here.
So the Drake equation looks at issues of simple probabilities around what's the probability of forming stars, what's the probability that the stars will be in a certain place, what's the number of planets that might have water or atmosphere, and it keeps going through a whole bunch of probabilities and multiplies them all. And then you take guesses as what the probabilities in those equations are. And one of the challenges when Drake came up with it, we hadn't discovered other planets yet, what we call extrasolar planets. And scientists sort of rightfully, in our professional day-to-day business, we have to be a little conservative. Until you actually see the other planets, you're not going to say conclusively they exist. But when it comes to things like the universe and as big as it is and planets, we knew why we weren't seeing other planets. Our telescopes weren't good enough. And now that we have the technology, we're finding them everywhere. And my argument is, okay, we also know that it's not, people were putting the probability of getting life, they were doing it from an idea forgetting that energy is coming into the system. It's what we call equilibrium physics. They were just thinking, okay, there's random processes and they all have to work to give life. That's the oil in the pan before it's heated, right? The pan is random processes, and you're going to put the probability at 0 that you're going to get the rolls. Once you heat it, you've completely changed the physics, and now the probability is 1 that you're going to get rolls. So my claim is we know there's a fairly wide range of parameters now where the probability is 1 or very close to 1 that you'll get life. And that completely changes all the things in the Drake equation. We know there's lots of places where you have planets, and the odds are many of them fall in the same range we do, and therefore many of them will have life, is my argument.
And we interviewed actually somebody that through the Smithsonian, but he's a NASA scientist, and he was talking about, 10, 15, 20 years ago that we thought, we were one of the only planets that
Right.
could inhabit. Now it's a couple thousand, and in
It's
10,
the other way
20
now.
years now
Yeah.
it's going to be 100,000. So, I mean, it does get to the possibility where it's like, wait a minute, if they can inhabit any sort of life, and you add up to 100,000 planets, there has to be something. We can't be just the solely planet out there that holds
Well,
life.
did it come to an answer? Does the Drake equation have an answer? Like, does he say there's this many?
Well, when he did it, unfortunately, most people were working under that misassumption that there weren't many planets. So that was the controlling number. You would plug in a very small number for that, and you would conclude, there's no life out there.
Now we plug in a large number,
But
which is
now
what
you
we
pull
know to
in
be
a large
true.
number there.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would argue is then in the other key factors where you say, it's a very low chance, like it's hard to get life because it's a low probability because it's random. I would turn that around. If you're in the right zone, which many planets are, the probability is going to be 1 that you get life. And so it really comes down to timescales. It comes down to how much variation is there in the time from when the conditions get right for life to occur to when you get intelligent life. So we only know one example of how long it took.
Mm-hmm.
That's our example. And what we don't know is so it's a slightly different question than the Drake equation puts in it. I think the right question that we don't know the answer to is what's that range of times it takes to get to intelligent life. So if it's how long it took us plus or minus 1,000 years, and you look at how far apart the typical planets are, then we're all roughly on the same technology scale. So even if they're 1,000 years ahead of us, they might be on their way already, but they wouldn't have time to get here yet. Or they might be heading to the wrong planet. Right?
Well, couldn't they be far enough ahead that they're millions of years ahead of us?
Now, and so that's the other question. So how many could be, say, millions of years ahead of us? And so that's where I think it's worth going back and doing the equivalent of what Drake did, but with other questions. So there you're asking, how likely is it to get a star and a planet under the right conditions? And we know stars go through life cycles, and that our sun is a later star in the evolution of the universe. So as physicists, we now have to ask the question, how many of the early stars have the similar conditions to what we have? And that would answer that question. How likely is it for someone to be millions of years?
Theoretically, they could have evolved life, had intelligent life, and died out by now.
They could have, exactly. And, there are going to be variations in intelligent life. You might get intelligent life that is not the least bit interested in traveling around you.
Right. True. There's people around my area where I grew up. They go like the next county over, and that's about all they go.
That's a big trip.
Exactly. So they may have been happy just staying in their solar system.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the scientific landscape as I see it. I think we can be very confident now as scientists that there's life elsewhere in the universe, and we can be very confident that there's reasons why they wouldn't have visited us and they wouldn't be that evolved yet. But it might be true, like you said, that there's something we don't know and they're ahead of us. So then I get to the non-scientific reason. So, as you know, I spend a lot of time on ancient aliens. So I get to be their friendly skeptic that says people built things. And this I find a fascinating kind of way to think about stuff. You have this challenge of you really have a question that science can't answer, right? If you look back at something that's old enough, that's shocking and surprising, did people do it or did aliens do it? Mm-hmm. And it's more of a detective mystery. You're in a much shakier ground. You're going with your kind of intuition and gut. And I just happen to be impressed with people's intelligence and what humans have been able to do over the years. So for me personally, I've yet to be shown something and say, nope, there's no way people could have done that. I mean, there's always sort of, I think, intriguing pathways to how people, even with, quote, primitive tools, were clever enough to do the things I've been shown.
Awesome.
That's
Tell
kind of
me
where I'm
right
coming
now, Doc, how did they make the Baalbek stones that weigh 1,200 tons? Tell me right now, please.
Those are the remind me which ones those are, because I always
in Baalbek, Lebanon. Tony will pull up a picture of it here, that are so
Yeah.
big you could stand like 1,000 people on it. They weigh 1,200 tons or something like that. They're the giant.
We're getting the picture.
Put
Yeah.
a picture up there,
I'm pulling
Tony.
it up right now.
It's a. They're in Baalbek, Lebanon, and they're along the base. They're just ungodly
Yes,
huge.
those.
Yeah.
And
I'm just throwing an example at you. Yeah.
It is a great example. And what I think other people have shown and done limited experiments on is it's amazing what levers can do. And I think what we forget is the one thing people didn't always do is write things down. And one of the reasons was this is kind of a cultural thing of ancient people. It was much more a secretive society. If you were the one who figured out how to move a 1,200-ton stone,
why would you tell everybody else? Right.
You would keep it secret because now you're the priest who's in power, right? You get to say, look what I do. And so for a large fraction of human history, having it as a secret is a huge advantage. And if that little group that's keeping it a secret dies out, then nobody knows how to do it anymore. And then we look back on it and say, oh my God, how did they ever do that? But we know enough now about things we can move. And yeah, so a lot of what we move right now uses metal cranes and hydraulics and winches. But even just look at what the Romans built, where we know how they did it. And we know, I mean, the aqueducts and the cities and just the huge stuff they moved, you know, we have written records of it, so we're not as surprised.
Right. We obviously, I think it's down to the two things. Either we had help extraterrestrially,
right,
or there was a technology that we gained and lost somewhere along the way. And if something happened here, I wouldn't know how to put lead in a pencil, let alone how to build a pyramid. I mean, seriously, an iPhone, I wouldn't, I'd be dead without it. So I couldn't even imagine if there was a tragedy, if North Korea goes nuts here,
right,
we're not going to be able to do anything because I'm not going to be able to do anything.
No, I know. And so that's kind of it. To me, one of the people will ask me from the science side, why are you willing to be on Ancient Aliens? And there's really two reasons to that. One is everyone who talks to me after seeing me on the show recognizes that the stuff I say is science and like it and thank me for it. And I figure, how often does a scientist get to reach millions of people?
Right.
I mean,
right. Long as you're not saying anything completely nutty on there, what's the difference, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other piece is it is. I personally think you can't deny they're fun questions. And like you said, you know, to me, the fun part is trying to figure out what technology did we lose. And that is a fun question. It's why I also like reading science fiction. It's why I like the superhero stuff.
I join you.
It's how could we do that? And other people find it interesting to think about how the aliens might have done it. And you know what? It's not really my place to judge one or the other. But then I'm an easygoing guy.
So if you actually look back in, you know, from the Mayans to the Egyptians to many other
right,
cultures, ancient cultures, when they do talk about sky people and,
right,
and stuff like that in their scripture, in their scriptures, and then their hieroglyphs and all that stuff, does that perk your mind when? Because my thing is, I a lot of times what I dream about is stuff that I see.
Right.
So a lot of the gods, I couldn't even imagine coming up with Thor and all these different gods if I didn't see something that would remind me of that.
Well, that the stories match the artifact. We have these giant ball-back things, and then there's a story about a guy came from a silver disc in the sky.
That's where I'm like, that's when I said earlier about does superheroes of today are inspired by the ancient past.
So I think that I have two answers to that. One is I think you raised a very interesting point that is actually pretty solid. It's like most of the time we as humans can only dream about or imagine things we've actually seen. Mm-hmm. And so you have to ask the question. So certain things people have suspicions of, like where did the idea of unicorns come from? Well, sailors saw the narwhals, the whales who have a horn, and so on.
Right.
And I do think it's interesting to think about this from the perspective of an analogy might be more recently you have Jules Verne, you have the first science fiction authors who are writing about technologies and things like the submarine that don't really exist. And then we go forward and build these. Right. So I think there's an equally interesting question. It could be somewhat evidence that, okay, something really dramatic happened. And so the closest I come to, so the other thing is, right, if aliens were visited and stayed and did something significant, I'm a little surprised that there's not more evidence because we're not really good at cleaning up after ourselves either, right? And we, as humans, when we went from one place to another, we weren't very good at leaving, right? It's like, let's wipe everybody out and take over. But you could imagine, I mean, one of the things I think about is if there's a reason a particular alien race decides to be highly nomadic, right? And that their
Right.
view of life is to just live in their ships and travel forever. And they happen to pass by and do a few things. So you could imagine one short interaction leading to certain things, right? That's one possibility. And if that happened, it would probably be visible and in fact impact people around the world. So there's a space there to consider that. But there's also other things. I mean, people's imaginations are very clever. And of course, birds and fish and all sorts of animals do interesting things. I mean, I think bats are freaky and scary looking. And you could imagine what you would
And
take
they have
a bat and turn
superpowers. I mean,
What was that?
they have superpowers with the sonar and everything. Until we figure that out, it's like
superpowers. And so you could imagine. And it's also interesting to think about what sort of how our memories as we evolved, how they either faded or lasted, right? What sort of experiences, the various, ancestors had before we were, quote, civilized, and how they viewed things in the world. Maybe there were more asteroids than there are now, and it was a common thing to have this flying chunk of fire come and hit the Earth. What would you make of that?
that's awesome.
Right.
I love it.
Well,
You have your question about the speed,
the speed.
the ships.
Oh, I thought. Oh, yes. So here's my thought. Okay, I thought we were talking drugs.
Tony
I
was
was
starting
like,
to fall
what?
asleep
Yeah,
there. He
speed.
sometimes does during the show.
No. My question is I think it's funny how after a certain period after World War II, how just quickly advanced into the space
Right.
program. I mean, literally in 1900 we were still covered wagons to by 1969 supposedly landing on the moon.
Right.
And-
Yeah. That
and-
was all faked,
Yes, so I've heard. But my
I hope no one actually quotes me on this episode.
yeah, right. We will. No, but in the 80s we had the space shuttles,
Right.
and then after that, so that's been what 25 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like we've just stopped. I mean, I know we're still progressing in space travel and stuff like that, but it's like we just stopped. There's no new, brand new, like, oh my God, look at this spaceship.
Also, the shuttles have only traveled 240 miles, where the other thing traveled 1 million miles.
Right.
Yeah.
So why are we not, if we're trying to get so much advanced, we have this technology that in 20, 25 years that, cell phones and everything else, why are we not so far advanced with ships that, is it cost or is there another reason?
I think it's economics, right? I mean, if you are a really smart person when it comes to technology, where are you going to make money? It's the iPhones and it's the tech, right? If you look at the pace, I mean, in just never mind our lifetimes, my kids' lifetime, what we're doing now, us sitting here doing this through Zoom,
Right.
This was not imaginable a
Right.
year ago.
No, not at all.
I mean, so the people who are interested in technology and technological advances have all gone into basically the telecommunications and, making computers in that world faster, smaller, cheaper, better. There's still the cost for space travel is still fundamentally set by the fuel and the requirement you got to break gravity and get out of the Earth. And we haven't had that technological breakthrough around fuel. So that cost isn't coming down. Now, the cost came down some, right? Because the computers on the original ships were, 1960s.
Right, we're half of this, supposedly.
Right, exactly, But that fundamental baseline cost of fuel and building that rocket to get off, we haven't solved. And there's not something out there that is an obvious way to make money, right, to recover your cost.
Right.
So I think the initial drive in the 60s was really the drive of the Soviet Union, right? If there was really the feeling. And so where are we still good at space? It's satellites, right? Those are still key. So our satellites are getting better and better, and we have more of them, and we know what we're doing because those play a role and make us money.
Right.
But getting much farther doesn't really matter.
Michael, let me ask you that. We're getting a little mad random here, but like you said, it's fun to just ponder these different things. I had a wonderful opportunity at a moment with Graham Hancock at Contact where we saw you there.
Right.
And him and I were talking about this recent article that had come out that showed that event that you were talking about in that wiped out the dinosaurs, most probably the the
Right.
asteroid hitting the Earth, and they were saying that where it hit knocked up. It was so shallow that it knocked up all this debris, which therefore blocked out the sun and killed off all the life, etc. Had that happened just a few minutes later, it would have fallen into a deeper part of the water, wouldn't have knocked up as much dirt, and history would have been completely changed forever just by a matter of minutes, because it would have just caused a huge tsunami, which would have caused damage on 1 degree, but not like wiping out the Earth for. Isn't that did you read about that when that came out?
I did, and I think I'm going to loop that back to my other statement about the
Loop away.
timescale for life to arise, right? So if you look at Earth, if you focus on individual events like that, you would say, wow, we're so lucky that this happened to hit right there, and that's why where we are now. And so it depends on whether you want to answer the question, is there life exactly like us, or is there intelligent life? Right? So had that asteroid hit somewhere else, the whole process of a life evolving still would have been going on. So
Different, though. It would have been a different life. Right.
So maybe we would end up with intelligent reptiles out of that. Maybe there would have been a different event, but it would have been 10,000 years later, and everything's off by 10,000 years. And that's why it comes down to this question of how much is the variation in different places before you get intelligent life? Because there still is a random factor in it, right? And it's that randomness that gives the variation in how long it takes to get intelligent life and what that intelligent life looks like. But you're still going to get there. So yeah, it depends a little bit on your perspective, which question you're trying to answer.
Right.
The question of getting life exactly like us, there were a lot of these events. If they were a little bit different, we wouldn't be here.
Wow. Here's this is another question. This is another.
And that just ended the whole interview.
No, and we're done. No, this is I think this is a fascinating question. I mean, we're always talking about trying to get to Mars or trying to colonize Mars. I know I've heard that there is already companies that pretty much own Mars. I'm not for sure if that's true, but I mean,
they think they do.
Yeah, they think they do. But here's my thought. If we're trying to colonize Mars, why? First of all. And then second, it's like if something happens to the Earth where it's uninhabitable. Well, Mars is uninhabitable. I mean, it's like, why are we not working on fixing our planet and, its flaws and, the things that we're doing to destroy it, and trying to colonize a planet that's already, there's not water, at least visible, and there's no oxygen that we can walk out and breathe. So why are we trying to colonize Mars? Why do you think that?
I think it's just, look at life in general. Life tries to expand, right? And if you look around in the next place, as humans, we can either expand into the oceans, right? Science fiction, I think, is pretty consistent.
Right.
It predicts the two ways we would go.
The oceans.
We would figure out how to live underwater, or we would figure out how to live on Mars. I mean, I think at one point a lot of people think, colonize the moon, but the reality is, you have trade-offs. Mars is farther away, harder to get to, but much closer to habitable. Right. It has at least some atmosphere. It has at least probably water under its surface of some sort. So there's a chance that you could do something there. The moon, you're starting completely from scratch. And it's totally one side's always facing the sun, the other side's always dark, all of this stuff. So I think we're not quite there yet, but we're going to continue. Population's going to continue to grow. It'll go through cycles. Who knows what we're going to do with our climate down the road? Who knows what we're going to do? If we're going to have a breakthrough in how to build cities better so we can live in a denser way, what we're going to do with food, or like in the Middle Ages, what plague is going to come that will then, reset population lower and we're starting over. But there's always this up and down in population, but it is steadily growing even with the downs. So I just think that that's what's driving us. At some point, we recognize we're going to need more space.
And we know the sun eventually is going to burn up, but they said we have to get off Earth at some point. We know
at some point. And when the sun does burn, the first thing it's going to do is become a nova that eats the Earth, kind of.
Right.
That's luckily far enough away.
Yeah.
That's the least of our worries.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that's what drives us.
Unless you believe in reincarnation.
Are into exploring and expanding and taking new space. And it might be that it's funny. I haven't heard in a while about people talking about colonizing the oceans. When I was a kid, that came up almost as much as colonizing Mars.
I think it's because if the nuclear thing wipes out the Earth, I mean, that's the oceans are no good either.
Right, exactly.
We got to get off of this.
Then we got to get off of
it. Right.
Yeah.
So I remember watching the History Channel once about, I think it was the top 10 probable extinction factors.
Okay. Yeah,
Do you remember that?
I do vaguely.
You know, like the super volcano up in Wyoming and the
Global
asteroid,
warming.
global warming.
Yeah.
I mean, what, as a scientist, what do you think is the most probable of the one that will destroy us? Us? Or...
Right. So, first of all, cockroaches exist and will always exist. So I have no
Well,
fear for life on Earth.
you and I are safe.
Yeah. One of the things, I think there's two things about biology in the Earth. I really do think the Earth is in kind of this sweet spot that until the sun really goes nuts, which is a long way off, life is safe. You know, it's a little bit egotistical of us to think we can wipe out life on Earth. Even global warming and climate change at its worst, you know, wipes us and a lot of species out, but not life on Earth. There are species that would be really excited suddenly if everything was a desert, the ones who live in the desert now. Right. So I think your question really is about what would most likely wipe us out.
Humans.
Right.
Yeah,
Humans.
that's what you mean, right, Tony? Yeah, humans.
And I think it's us. Right. But I think we're also the ones most likely to not wipe ourselves out if we can pay attention to it. And I do think our history has shown that we can be in danger in wiping lots of us out. But a core will figure out how to survive. And what I'm interested in is the challenge of, would we survive with iPhones, or would we totally reset? Right? What is the nature of the disaster we would cause ourselves? And I think, I mean, you already see it now, right? People are slowly starting to argue less about whether or not climate change is happening, and more about what's the type of things we would want to do and what type of climate would we want to have.
Right.
And how much, you know, because here's the thing, if you accept climate change is caused by humans, the interesting thing about that is you accept humans can change the climate. And that's kind of key, right? Because if you don't think humans are changing the climate, but you accept it's just changing through natural means, that's to me even more scary, because that means it's going bad and we have no control over it.
And quickly.
Right? And I think we've kind of reached the point where most people accept the evidence that it's actually going in directions we don't like. So you're almost happier if we're at least partially the cause, because that means we can partially affect it,
Or at least
go where we want.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting time we're in. And I think humans have faced this many times, you know. As soon as science and people started to realize, oh, population growth could be exponential and we're all going to wipe ourselves out and not have enough food, there was some, you know, you hate to say it, there were some plagues and disease, and it didn't happen, and we figured out how to grow food better. So I think we tend to be self-correcting, and it's a little bit of a race, and it's more how much of us and in what state are we going to save ourselves, and less are we going to be wiped out. But I'm an optimist.
Okay, Michael, then let's go to the thing that's not in our control. Let's go back to the beginning of the show.
Right.
What about getting hit by an asteroid? Do you think there's a chance of that? Can we stop that? Or you said it's inevitable that we will eventually get hit?
You know,
would that be a complete extinction or just partial?
I don't think it would be a complete extinction, because unlike the dinosaurs, we do have technology, right? And if you look at it right now, humans are living in some pretty bizarre and extreme climates across the globe.
Right.
So even though it would be a very, very major disaster, and it would cause problems for large numbers of people. It would not be fun to live through, but I don't think it would wipe out humanity like it did the dinosaurs. We would have some challenges to adjusting. But you know, we do have agriculture and raising animals and doing all this stuff. The dinosaurs just relied on the world around them, right? And so when what they had went away, they didn't have a means to actively adapt.
We're not even going to have to raise animals anymore. Was it Richard Branson? Somebody just put in all that money they're going to grow protein meat like in a lab, right?
Oh my God!
So as long as that lab survives, we're okay.
That's right. Well, before we get out of here, because we have about 4 minutes left, I want to definitely talk about your book, Divine Science.
Yeah.
So tell us about the book, and I mean, I find it fascinating because growing up in Kansas and, you know, the Bible Belt,
Right.
And science and religion don't always go hand in hand. So can you talk about the book for us a little bit?
One of the things, so first of all, for full disclosure, I'm a believing Catholic, which also is danger. But I'm also, my mother's Jewish, so I'm a Irish Catholic Russian Jew.
Well, you got a whole combination there.
I have a lot going on there. But I'm also a physicist, obviously. And one of the things that I realized about the vocal debate of science versus religion is only the people on the extremes were getting a major voice.
Right. True.
And one thing it did is for many people who believe in some version of God, they were hearing this message from both sides of the argument that your only choice, if you're going to accept science, is to stop believing. And I felt that was a false choice. So this book really, when you write a book, you ultimately have to pick a target audience. And one direction I could have gone. That's a good
point, actually. I like it.
Yeah. One direction I could have gone is to try and jump in the argument and make a case for one side or the other. But my other point is, whether you believe in God or you don't, whether you're a believer or an atheist, you have to understand you just made a choice and an assumption. And both of those are valid starting points, and they're valid ways to go, but they can't be proven. Those are both starting assumptions. And then you just, you choose to live your life, how those assumptions, where they lead you. And so I wanted to write a book that started with the assumption that God existed, and then asked the question, and that science works. And ask the question, where does that lead you? And that's what I did. And so I actually even took on issues of miracles and free will and life after death. I did the usual stuff, evolution and Big Bang, but those are easy to reconcile, despite that they're the ones that people most often debate. And that's the kind of the book I wrote, and that's the target audience I aimed it for, is if you're a believer but you're unsure what you're supposed to do with science, this helps you understand why science works.
I'm always frustrated that these don't have to be mutually exclusive. This is ridiculous. I've always felt that they can coincide, right?
Yeah. And so that's what I did. And it was fun to do, and it's fun to go speak about it and talk about it. So it's kind of been a different path in my career. So now I feel like I'm the scientist who talks about aliens, superheroes, and religion. But I tell you, I will never be the scientist who talks about politics. That's just
we go.
Michael, this whole hour's been fun. I'll tell you what,
I had a great time.
We could have 30 beers in a bar with you and just keep talking about these things. I mean, really, seriously. We think the same way you do. We love talking about these things. It's just fun to ponder. It's so much more interesting to me than seeing what celebrity's got a cold or what have you.
Yeah. And living in Hollywood, I guarantee we hear a lot of that.
That's right.
You definitely do.
Well,
thank you guys. This has been great.
No, we had a great time, and we definitely will have you back again because this was a great conversation. For everybody out there, please go pick up the book, Divine Science. You can pick it up on Amazon. I'm sure pretty much anywhere they sell books. And do you have a email, website?
So Twitter is @DenninMichael, and my Facebook is @ProfDenninMichael.
Perfect.
Do you have a personal cell phone number you'd like to give out to the public right now?
Well, not necessarily, but you can also, if you think at all about education, we're creating the Office of the Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning UC Irvine's YouTube channel. It doesn't have a good link yet, but if you Google me and you Google OVPTL, which is a horrible acronym because it sounds like some sort of bad drug, you can find our YouTube channel.
And what's that one more time?
So that's Googling me and OVPTL. You'll find the Office of the Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning YouTube channel. And we have to get up to 100 subscribers before we can give it a rational link. And we're getting close. All right. It's a new thing I've been doing in my role here at UC Irvine.
We'll put your link in the description on our channel. So hopefully we can get you guys some
So both our listeners will also probably do that.
Right.
So that'll help you.
That'll get us, to 96.
That's right.
Well,
awesome.
and that said, make sure you subscribe right below here.
That's it.
For our channel, and we'd love to have you guys leave comments and tell us who you want to have on our show. Until next time, I'm Tony Sweet.
Captain Ron, thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Captain Michael.